Hello everybody! It's Ash here, and today I wanted to talk to you about Sonic Prime. As you probably already know, Sonic Prime is the most recent Sonic animated show that has been coming out on Netflix ever since December last year, and we just got second season, aka the second half of the first season. It's complicated. Back in July, and the show's had a little bit of time to cook. And I've finally been able to get my thoughts sorted out, and I wanted to talk about the show because I've been realizing I think it's kind of mid. I don't really like it. I'll be honest. It's not bad. Granted, the show has good points. Like the animation is pretty great. The action choreography is top notch for this kind of show. It's fun to watch. As far as Sonic shows go, it probably has like the best action choreography out of all of them, and just in general, seeing a serious Sonic story is still nice coming out of the very weird 2010s where Sonic is trying nothing but be funny and self-aware and stuff. It is a cool show conceptually, and it is like well produced. The writing is solid, the production quality is solid. It's all very solid. It's a good show. Especially for kids. It is a good show. But as a Sonic fan who has been loving, absolutely adoring everything that's been coming out of this series recently, or at least most things. So I love Sonic Frontiers. I've been obsessed with the ADW comics. I still adore Sonic, and this video is probably going to come off as a bit negative because I'm talking negatively about the subject at hand here. But just in general, I want you guys to know that I absolutely love this franchise, including the recent things that have been coming out. And in general, like, let's try to look this with a positive outlook, because the main reason I'm making this video is exactly because I want to share with you guys what I've been feeling, especially because it doesn't seem to be such a popular opinion. And that has made me feel a little, I don't know, left out, I guess. People seem to be enjoying it, which is great, and I just kind of want to throw my 2 cents into the conversation and see what y'all think. We can discuss about it. You can share maybe where you see where I'm coming from, or maybe disagree, or anything like that, but let's try to be nice and respectful to each other. I'm just trying to share my thoughts here because, you know, keeping thoughts to this little head of mine here is pretty difficult. Anyway, let's get into the actual conversation. So, the show is all about Sonic shattering this MacGuffin crystal thingy and basically sharing reality into different dimensions. So it's basically kind of like a different spin in a multiverse story, and that has potential. That's pretty cool, especially since the show was trying to be serialized to a certain extent and doing a continuous story that's somewhat serious and whatnot. So that's cool, conceptually. So the first thing that threw me off was the fact that a lot of things weren't really matching up with the main Sonic game / IDW Comics canon, which is weird because Sega was specifically stating that the show is supposed to be canon. It's supposed to be part of the main story. And I'm not going to be like a whiny, nerdy fan that's going to be like, but this doesn't really match up with the canon or whatever. But like, as someone who is, at least to a certain degree, invested in these characters, in this world, it's just kind of, like, it kind of threw me off. It already, like, made the show kind of start on a bit of, you know, the wrong foot for me, because I went in expecting something as respectful and maybe, to a certain degree, as referential to the games as Frontiers or ADW are, because that's what I've been used to by now, and since they specifically clarified, this is supposed to be canon, that's what I was going on expecting. I was going into the show expecting that. But it isn't really that. In reality, a lot of little things seem to contradict game canon in some odd ways. Things that characters should know about, or at least like realistically mention, are just sort of ignored, and some things about the status quo are also a little bit different in very odd ways. Even though, like, generally speaking, nothing directly contradicts to a point where you can like make it like a stretch and like justified with a lot of weird explanations. Many things about this show just don't really line up with what you would expect from the main version of these characters. First off, how the characters act isn't really like all that close to how they're supposed to act in the main canon, which isn't that much of an issue in my opinion, because Sonic's characterization has been loose enough over the years that like seeing his mood be a little bit different, like he in Prime he's a little less serious than he was in Frontiers and arguably the IDW comics, but I feel like maybe he just woke up in a different mood that day. You know, Sonic has been serious, Sonic has been goofy, and it's normal for people to actually like switch around between these kinds of moods and these kinds of attitudes. Maybe not to the exact extent of Sonic, but it's something I can suspend my disbelief about to some extent and still enjoy the show and still see that as main game Sonic. What really bothers me is how a lot of things that are supposed to be a certain way just aren't. So, for example, Green Hill Zone, it's like the area Green Hill, is given a lot of importance by the characters in a way that Sonic himself, nor any of the characters ever really seem to. It's mostly probably a reflection of how the real world people, you know, the fans and whatnot, I guess not fans usually not hate Green Hill, but like how the general people see Green Hill as like the Sonic area, like Sonic's Mushroom Kingdom, even though like in reality, like it's just sort of a place. Sonic goes there sometimes, he likes it, but that's it. The characters seem to live in Green Hill Zone and like be weirdly attached to it. Like there's this one tree and this one loop-de-loop that Sonic keeps mentioning over and over again. Like, oh, these are such important places that mean so much to me. They've never really been a thing at all. And also like little things like Rouge being hanging around Sonic, Tails, Knuckles, and Amy, even though she's more of a loner type. If anything, she's more Shadow's friend than Sonic's friend. And as an extension to that, Knuckles hanging around these people isn't really that much his thing either. He usually stays up in Angel Island guarding the Master Emerald. But even the games have ignored that to some extent, so I can let that slide. But the Rouge thing still kind of bothers me, especially because Shadow is later on characterized as the version of Shadow we've been seeing more recently that most fans really don't like. That being, you know, the very brooding, loner, edgy, overly edgy kind of version of Shadow, who people apparently don't think is in the show. It's weird because if you ask me, the way they portray Shadow in this show, where Sonic specifically mentions like, oh, and you have no friends, and he like doesn't seem to disagree in how he immediately jumps to violence when issues get out of hand, and how he's immediately like willing to work alongside Sonic to get things figured out. That reads to me like brooding post-2010s Shadow. That to me, that's the version of Shadow people complain about in IDW that people really don't like. But everyone online seems to disagree with me for some reason. Like, are we even watching the same show? Because people have been saying, oh, they did Shadow right this time. Shadow's done correctly. And I just don't see it. To me, this is pissed off, flannerized Shadow that they've been doing recently. Maybe a little bit better because he has more of a role in the story, he does more things, and he actually helps. But he's still extremely selfish and extremely non-Shadow. Shadow's whole spiel is protecting Earth because that was Maria's wish. And that's not like a sentiment I really see in this version of Shadow. And speaking of Shadow, in episode 2, he does Chaos Control. And that got me so excited because before that point, there were so many little like inconsistencies and like lack of references or mentions of previous events in the canon that like when Shadow did something remotely like game-like and, you know, referential to the adventure games, that got me disproportionately excited. If the most game-accurate thing you've done is Shadow doing Chaos Control, which is a basic Shadow the Hedgehog thing, maybe there's something wrong here. Like, for a second, the ring mechanics seemed to be actually a thing in the universe, but then they kind of forgot about it, so I don't know what they were going for in that. Maybe the writer just kind of forgot. I don't know. But it's never been a thing in the comics. It's never been a thing in the games. It's just supposed to be like a game mechanic. Aside from like that one cutscene in Sonic Adventure and that one joke in Sonic Frontiers.
What is your end goal?
It varies. Sometimes it's a spinning sign, sometimes it's a big old ring.
No, I mean, what do you want to accomplish?
Oh.
It's never really been that much of a thing. So it just kind of like make me, sure? And so there are these little inconsistencies that keep piling on. Later in the second season, there's this different robot copy of Sonic that the new villains create. And Sonic seems to treat it as if it's a brand new original idea.
Is that a knockoff me?
Like, okay, not even like a throwaway line, oh, yeah, Eggman's done this before. How about, man, oh, you remind me of someone. Anything like that. Same thing for when Sonic goes into the dimension where the Eggman plural have won and taken over everything. Not even that happened once because, you know, Sonic Forces is a fairly recent game where that happened. but nah, Sonic seems to treat like, oh, Eggman won? Like that never happened before. And it's just these little things that keep piling on. And ultimately, what that leads to is that, well, none of this is like legitimately, like actually, you know, a bad thing from a writing perspective necessarily. You know, the movies are anything but canon, but this, at least the second one, is pretty enjoyable. I like it a lot. It just means that as a fan, this show is just kind of frustrating to watch because it's in that sort of uncanny valley where it's kind of supposed to be canon, but there's just enough stuff to like be actively annoying to watch sometimes because you expect the characters to say one thing and they say another, or you expect them to mention something or acknowledge something they don't, and some things are just inexplicably different for no noticeable reason. That's like the whole general sentiment I have about the show as a general Sonic fan. But even disregarding that, I feel like this show is just kind of boring, to be honest. A lot of things about this show are just very gimmicky and surface level. And again, I want to stress, it's not poorly made. It's decently written. It's really well animated. It's really well directed. But it's just very basic. To me, this reads like a kid show that's first and foremost supposed to sell toys. And I mean, Sonic is a kid's franchise, like that's accurate, but with, again, the comics and Frontiers especially, we've been seeing the creators and writers and stuff manage to strike a balance between being, you know, fun for the older fans who like the references and like the slightly more serious stuff and whatnot, and still being accessible enough so people who aren't into these franchises can still like follow along and enjoy the story, and maybe even like get interested and know what all this lore is all about and stuff. And that's not what we get from Prime, because it's just very basic. In the, again, IDW and Frontiers especially, we see mostly in Flynn, but also the other writers at the IDW doing like a great job in making the characters feel a little more believable and having feelings and conflicts and arcs. And just being very interesting. Sonic has been very interesting recently. IDW especially is downright fascinating at times. I love what they do in that with the character writing, especially the original characters. They do a lot of great stuff in that. And meanwhile, the best character in Prime is 9, which is like the dystopia egg world version of Tails. And in that, Tails, this version of Tails is actually pretty interesting because he's basically a version of Tails that didn't have Sonic to guide him towards the path of good, I suppose, and not being like an angsty asshole. Which is a very interesting take on the character. It's a genuinely cool take that goes some interesting places, especially in the finale. We're gonna get to that in a second. But aside from that, the characters are all very basic and very gimmicky. We have like 5 different dimensions, 5 or so different dimensions that we keep jumping between. So the characters go basically in this scavenger hunt where they're trying to find the shards of the crystal that keeps the dimensions together. And it's just a lot of back and forth between these very generic kind of places. And we see a lot of... The generic is just a very good way to describe basically a lot of the show, especially these different dimensions and these different versions of the characters. They're all very generic and gimmicky. I want to bring attention especially to what they did with Eggman here, because instead of doing different versions of Eggman for each dimension, Eggman has been spread into 5 versions, but they're all in the same dimension. That is the dimension where Eggman won, the dystopian dimension, or whatever. It's New York City, as they call in the show. And they're all so annoying! I'm not one to get annoyed by characters usually. I usually have like a pretty high tolerance for characters that are traditionally considered to be annoying. But god damn it, I really don't like the ad console. They are like some Illumination Studios level jokes about people's stereotypes, and they're so like unfunny. They're like jarringly unfunny, and it's genuinely like a pain to go through. Every time they pop up on screen, I audibly groaned, because they were like these very basic stereotypes. So like we have like the gamer kid who says hashtag a lot and isn't very interested in anything because he's like, you know, the angsty teenager one. And then there's the baby, whose whole joke is being a baby. And then there's the hipster one, who's just a hipster stereotype, and the old one, who's just an old stereotype. And then the main one, who doesn't really have that much of a personality. He's just Eggman, but without the goofiness, and like a lot of the goofiness anyway. And he does try to be a little bit serious, but he's not nearly as serious as we've seen, like even like main series Eggman being in other times. He's just kind of there. He's the leader. They all have like very basic, annoying, jokey gimmicks, and to an extent that also extends to the different dimension versions of the main Sonic cast, where like we have the forest one and the pirate one and the dystopian one. They're all very basic ideas derived from those tropes, the story tropes. So we have a pirate story in the pirate world, we have a deforestation story in the forest world, and whatnot. And it's very generic and very basic, and nothing particularly stands out as particularly interesting. Especially in the second season, where they're just kind of going back and forth between the worlds. It all just feels like they're trying to do this to sell toys, first and foremost. Like, oh, we got the cool pirate Knuckles, and the cool forest Knuckles, and the cool New Yorker accent Knuckles. Because otherwise, it's just very basic and generic. And again, in Season 2, they just start kind of going back and forth between the worlds. And since I'm not particularly invested in any of these characters, in any of these worlds, it just kind of gets annoying, because you keep expecting, oh, maybe they're gonna go deep now, maybe they're gonna make it interesting now, but they never really do. They just pop up, they're like, each one of them has like one thing about them, like, and Pirate Knuckles is all about the me booty, and he wants to grab his crystal shard thingy because that's his thing. And then Forest Dale is just like the wild, like, he doesn't speak, just like roars and stuff like, and on and on and on. They're all like very simple, oh, we can make this a toy and sell like 5 different versions of Knuckles, you know? Hits me as very gimmicky and not particularly interesting. And that's the thing, because in general, I feel like the show is pretty good as a kid's show meant to sell toys and stuff. In the sense that it's not really meant to be good, it's just meant to be entertaining for the kids and to sell toys. And like, if you're an adult, you're gonna tolerate it, but I don't think you're gonna get much out of it, which is just frustrating, because Sonic has been so cool and interesting in other places. But here we just have a very basic, generic kids show with some good action scenes and a tolerable story, but not much more. And as a Sonic fan, I do feel a little bit, you know, disappointed by that, because I do expect more from this franchise nowadays, because Sonic has done really well as far as story goes recently in the 2020s, starting with Frontiers and the comments again. In a lot of ways, this show feels like it's borrowing a lot of plot points from a Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart, which is a phenomenal game with a great story, with a lot of similar beats and story ideas. But while that manages to like tug at the heartstrings and have some really fun, interesting, funny dialogue, as well as like serious and emotional dialogue, and they balance it really well for ESRB rated T audience. Meanwhile, Prime really does feel like it's just targeting that toy demographic, first and foremost, at least to me. I would probably have enjoyed this much more in a pre-Ian Flynn world. So we're talking like 2017, 2018, when like we had like Sonic Forces and stuff. And okay, Ian Flynn was around before that, but before we really got into the comics, we were all like really angry at Sega for not really doing Sonic stories that were anything but either bad or just very, very, comedy focused and kiddie and like with some like really basic unfunny humor. And Prime is like a step in between the quote unquote meta era, as people now call it, the funny let's be self-aware Sonic 2010s era, and like the current style of writing with Frontiers. This feels like it's somewhere in between that, and to me that just quite isn't enough nowadays. Back when I was starving for content like this and I wanted a more serious Sonic story with serialized elements and all that stuff, I would have eaten this up for sure. But we have better stuff now. We have more fascinating, interesting, and cooler stuff now. Meanwhile, Prime is just kind of like, it has some good stuff, but it also has some really boring and uninteresting stuff. And it just kind of there. I was kind of just bored, just kind of like watching it out of obligation as I was going through the show. And the finale that we got, like the season 2 finale, that arguably season 1 finale, whatever, is a good example of these ups and downs that we do have in the show, because it has some really cool action scenes. Some of the dialogue between Sonic and Shadow is actually pretty cool in that episode in particular, despite, again, my usual gripes with how Shadow is portrayed in the show. Also, we have a very, very underdeveloped final fight, where for whatever reason the doctors, the Egg console, the Eggman console, whatever, Chaos console, that's what they call it. They summon like this huge Eggman Titan thing, which just kind of comes out of nowhere. I don't know what they were going for with that. And they actually give Sonic a really cool looking transformation to fight it. But the fight lasts like a minute and a half, and it's not really cool. And of course, they're not gonna do the Sonic Frontiers thing with like metalcore and whatever. They just don't. And that's exactly what I mean. Like, that is targeting me. I am the target audience for Frontiers and the cool boss fights with the metal music. But I'm not really the target audience for the basic giant Eggman boss fight that's not really a boss fight, and it's not even that much of a cool action scene because it doesn't have much to it. It's kind of a waste of an actually really cool looking form, and it's nice that we're getting different forms from Sonic again. It's been a while. It's nice to see different designs and stuff being incorporated into Sonic again. That is actually pretty cool. And on top of that, another really cool thing about the finale is the cliffhanger at the end, because as I mentioned before, 9, the dystopian version of Tails, is like the most interesting character in this whole show probably, and it hits again similar plot beats to Rich and Black Rift Apart, but that is a good thing in my book, because he is actually a fairly interesting version of Tails, and in the end he does some morally questionable things that lead on to a very interesting conflict in the next season. And that could go places. That I can see being interested, and that's probably why I'm gonna keep watching this show going forward when the next season comes up, because I'm actually interested in that plotline in particular. But otherwise, this show is just kind of boring and weirdly frustrating as a Sonic fan, with all the weird contradictions to the main canon in how the characters fail to mention stuff that they should know by now. Anyway, that's about it, pretty much. I wanted to see if you guys agreed with me, if I'm actually going places over here, if I'm just like, this is my biggest L so far in this channel. But let's talk about it, let's discuss. Thanks for watching, and bye-bye.